All right, today is October
29th? I think it is the 29th, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds about right. What day is it, Laura? All right. And I'm sitting here with an old friend, Casey Barber. And he is visiting the Snoqualmie Valley. A mutual friend of ours is having a memorial who passed away recently. And he decided to drop in here at our house. And we're talking about all things haunted, paranormal, and swapping stories. So, because you're here in person, we wanted to ask you directly about a few things because it's really important to my wife and I to get the firsthand account. And I can tell your story, and I love telling your stories. But when you tell that story, what's better is that you were there, you saw it, you heard it, you experienced it. And then when you tell us, we're hearing everything from the horse's mouth. So first of all, before we go any further, just want to make sure it's okay that we have permission to record you today. And is that all right with you?
Yeah, it's plenty fine.
All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background. And you grew up here in the Snoqualmie Valley. And just a little while ago, you shared with me something that I'd never heard before, that basically you had some trauma at a young age, and you connect that trauma with some of the abilities that you possess to see the other side or communicate with spirits or the spirit realm. Go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you grew up.
My name's Casey Barber. I grew up here in the Snoqualmie Valley, lived here most of my childhood and teen life until I was about 19 years old when I moved out of the valley. I grew up on 166th Street Southeast up by Wilderness Rim. I moved around a few times, moved to Cedar Village, high school, lived in Snoqualmie. So I've been all over the valley pretty much my whole adult life up until that point. And it's good to be back here. I get to see a lot of people I haven't seen in a very long time.
Cool. And as a child, you experienced a near-death experience.
I did. I found out I was allergic to sea chlor. I had a surgery at Overlake Hospital. And after that surgery, while I was recovering, I started having very, very bad itching pain and felt like my skin was crawling with fire ants, if that makes sense. And I was telling my mother that I didn't feel right. And she goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I feel like I'm on fire. And I was squirming back and forth. I still had an IV in my arm, and my blood pressure spiked so high, the IV actually shot out of my arm. And I had to get medical attention right away. They had to give me a shot of epinephrine and a crash cart to bring me back to life because I went into anaphylactic shock and stopped breathing. So.
And then you say ever since then you've had experiences where you felt in communication with spirits, paranormal, something beyond yourself. Is that correct?
That's correct. So since that experience, I've felt presences. I've seen shadow figures, and I've always just felt connected to things that aren't necessarily of this world any longer, whether those are spirits or entities or what have you.
Cool. Well, one of the favorite stories of ours is the Mt Si Tavern when you were a bartender. Now, I've told this story, but now that you're here, I probably would prefer that you tell the story. Go ahead and give it a shot, man.
Yeah, so I worked at the Mt Si Tavern. Can't tell you honestly what year it was. It was in the 2000s at some point in time. It was before, I'd say it was right around 2010, maybe. But I was closing up the bar, and there was 2 people left in the bar with me. That was the owner's wife and another patron that was there. I was wiping down the bar, all the lights and everything were off. Everybody had left. And I walked around towards the front door of the bar and something caught my eye. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something and I turned to my right and there was a gentleman sitting at the edge of the bar, and it's a horseshoe bar, and he had his elbows on the table and his chin on his hands like this, and he was just sitting there listening to me talk. And I kind of shook it off because I didn't realize what was going on. And then I looked over again and he was gone. At that point in time, the patron that was still there said to me, "You look like you just saw a ghost, like you're pale white. Are you all right?" And I said, I kind of laughed and shrugged it off. I said, "Well, I just did see a ghost." And she got freaked out by it. I was kind of shooken up about it. And the next day, I had talked to the owner of the bar and I told her what I had saw. And she goes, "Oh, that's really interesting. Like, are you sure, that's what you saw?" And I gave her a description of the guy, what he looked like. I saw his beard, his hair, he had glasses on and a red and black flannel shirt, and he was clear as day. And a woman had come in later on that afternoon, and she said to me, "Are you Casey?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she goes, "Oh, I heard you saw something in here the other night." And I said, "Yeah, I did." "Why?" And she goes, "Hold on one second." And she pulled out of her purse a Polaroid picture and showed me the picture. And she says, "This who you saw?" And I said, "Yes, to a T. That's exactly who I saw. He was wearing the same thing that I saw in the picture." And at that point in time, I knew that it was real. And she explained to me who she was. She was the former fiance or wife, spouse of this gentleman, and told me he had worked there at one point in time. And he was closing up bar and told her he was going to be home in a little bit, and he never came home. So she became increasingly worried and called the authorities. Apparently, the authorities went and knocked on the door. The gentleman had opened the door, and he had his hand behind his back, apparently, and they told him to let him see his hands, and he took his own life on the front steps of the Mt Si Tavern, apparently. And that was before my time, and I'd never heard that story in my life, and I was only 21 at the time. So,
well, what makes me feel good, what makes us feel good, is that when I've recited your story, I've pretty much told it verbatim. Like I didn't get anything wrong. Everything that I've accounted was exactly how you've described it, although I wasn't there. So for the sake of accuracy, that makes us feel pretty good that we're recording these correctly. The other thing is, I know that happened in 1990, and that was a famous event here in 1990. And I remember, I was 16 years old at the time, and I remember people talking about that. Mm-hmm. And they were in shock, and it was a shocking event locally. So let's fast forward to 2011. Now, this is another story that I love to tell, and I want to make sure that we're getting the information correct. But you talked to us a few years ago about a special project in 2011 where you and a crew were rebuilding the hydroelectric facility behind Snoqualmie Falls. Yes. And you experienced a series of very unusual things. Go ahead and tell us all about that.
So 2010, 2013, I worked on the Snoqualmie Falls hydroelectric redevelopment project. I was working for a subcontractor out of Bozeman, Montana, Barnard Construction, and we were working under Puget Sound Energy. Funny thing, I got that job while I was working at the Mt Si Tavern. The guys used to come in, and I said, "Hey, what do you guys do? Like, how do I get a job with you guys? Because I'm tired of being a bartender." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." One gentleman said, "I'll tell you what, I'll stick my neck out for you, but don't let me down." And 2 days later, I got a call from the superintendent and had an interview and went to work 2 days after that. But when I first started working there, they said, "Well, you're going to go down in the hole." And I said, "What? What are you guys talking about?" And there's about a 200-foot cavern underneath Snoqualmie Falls that not a lot of people know about. People in the valley obviously do. So I went down there. We were pulling out the original generator units, all the stator units, replacing penstock pipe to make it produce more power, pretty much. And we're redoing everything that had been originally built, and that was 1894, I believe. So everything that was there was original from 100 years ago. During that time, we were working with miner's lamps down there. We didn't have any light down there, power of any kind. And I'd feel presences down there, like I was being watched. I'd hear really weird things, things being dropped, or big bang noises, or sound of nails being dropped, things of that nature, when there wasn't anybody in those specific places in the cavern. Whether those were disembodied sounds or not, I think they were, but I can't tell you with 100% certainty. But there's a lot of power down in Snoqualmie Falls, underneath the falls. As you know, it's sacred land for one, and I don't know for a fact if people lost their lives there at one point or another, but there's definitely presences down there. And I found some really cool stuff, old square nails and things down there, old ceramic insulators and things from the past. But there's definitely some sort of spirit trapped down there still, or stuck there, or something that likes to mess with people.
So one thing that we connected the dots with is you told a story of while you were descending in ropes, you heard the sound of rocks being thrown at you, but you did not feel the sensation of rocks. They never made contact with you. You only heard the sound. And what's interesting is that we connected that incident with the 1924 Ape Canyon incident. Now, people down there know the story, the famous story of the miners that were in a shack that were supposedly attacked by a group of Sasquatch or Bigfoot-like beings. And all night long, they defended this little miner's shack. And in that story, these Bigfoot were interdimensional. They blinked in and out of reality. And they threw rocks at the cabin, but the folks that were there described the rocks as never hitting them. They just heard the sound of rocks, but they weren't physical rocks. They were imaginary, the sounds of rocks. So when you told me this story over the phone about descending on ropes, and then you heard the sound of rocks, but they never hit you, I immediately connected to the 1924 Ape Canyon incident down by Mount St. Helens. And it's funny because in the stories of Ape Canyon, they describe, and you talk about the traditional beliefs, you talk about interdimensional people. They are basically tribes of people that live in another dimension of reality. Now, what's interesting about Snoqualmie Falls is the traditional belief depicts the falls as a portal to another world, a spirit city, or another dimension where these other beings live. So I found it very fascinating that you encountered these, I guess, interdimensional rocks that were being thrown at you, but that never hit you. Very similar to the 1924 incident. So go ahead and tell us about that detail.
So yeah, we were working in the cavern off a work platform tied on with harnesses and everything else being lowered down in the cavern. And at that time, we were hearing stuff hitting up above us and around us, and there was no one there. There was a guy up top with the radio. His name was Dave. Dave was on the radio. We started talking to him. We're saying, hey, are you up there? Like, did you just drop something? Anything else like that? And he said, no, I'm not even in there. I'm in a warming shack outside the shaft. Because the rule was, if anyone was working in or around that shaft going down underneath Snoqualmie Falls, no one was allowed to be up there, because if something falls and hits you, there's a good chance it can severely hurt you or kill you. And like I said, there's a lot of disembodied sounds, so you'd hear things that weren't actually physically there. That was one instance of that, and we were wondering if someone was up in the tree line throwing stuff at us, or what was hitting around our general area, and we couldn't find any evidence of things being thrown or dropped or anyone even near the vicinity that we were in. So kind of freaky.
And then, did I understand you right where you heard like breathing down in the ground? I remember you telling me something about that.
I've heard sounds of like people talking echoing through the tail race. So the tail race is where the generators push all the water back out into the Snoqualmie River.
Okay.
So it's actually a big, long tunnel. If you're standing up on top of the observation deck looking at Snoqualmie Falls, you can see a hole off to the right-hand side of the falls.
Sure.
There's a platform down there where you can actually walk all the way down above the water to the end of that
So
tunnel.
you heard conversations. You heard people's voices or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard people
tunnel.
talking down there or like the sound of breathing.
Okay.
And I've gone down there and looked because I was in charge of people tagging in and out of that cavern. If anyone was down there, they shouldn't have been. And I went down there to investigate, say, hey, what are you doing down here? Because there's guys who went down there to take cigarette breaks or whatever because they weren't allowed to smoke underground and, they break the rules. But I just hear it's what sounded like talking or whispering or breathing off in the distance. And it sounded like it was coming from that direction. But there's never anybody down there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And it's my belief that water is one of the things that can amplify spirits and spiritual activity and other stuff. So it makes sense. And I don't know, like I said before, I have a suspicion that people were injured or killed when they originally dug through there, but I have no proof of that. But yeah, I've heard all kinds of weird things down there, and really, really cold air at certain times when there's no wind or anything else, so.
That's amazing. So I think your assessment of water being a conduit of spirituality is right on the money. And in fact, speaking with some of the indigenous population, you remember Earl Moses, he actually told me that the salamander, which is a master on the water, in and around the water. The salamander is pretty much a master of water. It's a water creature, is one of the highest spiritual animals in the Pacific Northwest in the Salish religion. So the master of water is the highest level of healing power and spirit power of the entire Pacific Northwest. So speaking of indigenous, and I think we'll go ahead and travel outside of the Snoqualmie Valley because I think that your other stories down and it was Nevada, right?
No, it's down in California in Independence, which is a one-horse town outside of Big Pine and Bishop, California.
Okay. I'd like to hear a little bit about, there are two stories that caught my attention. First, let's start with the walkers.
Okay.
And then we'll go with the woman in black, right?
The black lady.
The black lady.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear all about it.
Okay, so I lived in Indian Reservation in Independence, California. I followed Barnard down there to work on a dry lake job, which is Owens Lake. That was in 2013 as well. I believe right before it turned 2014. It was July. But I was just driving around in my truck on the side roads and grabbed some beer from the gas station and went and sat out there to kind of just check everything out and watch the sunset. And as it got dark, I was sitting there on my tailgate of my truck and I saw what looked like a man or woman, I couldn't tell you honestly, walking in the distance. And I thought, this is kind of a weird place for somebody to be walking because there's nothing out there. It's the middle of the high desert. It's 126 degrees in the summertime during the day, and it gets cold at night down in the 30s. So it was kind of just odd to me and stuck out. And I tried to make conversation with this individual, and I was, speaking loudly from my tailgate saying, hey, you all right? Or, hey, what are you doing? What's going on? Do you need help? And the person never responded. And they just kept walking and walking and walking until they had disappeared into the distance. And I had brought this up to some of the Native Americans that live there locally. One lady specifically, and her name is Kathy. Kathy is one of the elders of the tribe down there, and they're Paiute Native Americans. And she had told me, she goes, those are what we call walkers. And I said, okay, well, what's that? And she said, I believe they're spirits that are trapped here and don't really have anywhere to go or anything here. They're just wandering around aimlessly, which was kind of strange to me. But, I took it for what it is and went, oh, that's kind of cool then. Didn't really freak me out or anything, but I was more concerned for the individual themselves. And then moving on to the black lady. So apparently I believe it was the 30s, there was a woman who lived on the reservation with her sons, and tragically there was a house fire. In the house fire, her kids tried to save her and get her out of the house, but they were not able to do so. And she died a tragic, probably really crappy death. And she's known as the Black Lady. Anyway, I was driving home down a street in the middle of the night, and a woman walked across the street right in front of my truck, and I had to slam on my brakes because I almost hit the lady. So I rolled down my passenger window because she had walked into the bushes, and I asked her, I said, hey, are you okay? And whatever it was hissed at me, almost like a cat hiss, and it scared the living crap out of me. So I said, nope. I just rolled up my windows and drove home. And I was telling my wife and her mother about that. And her mom goes, oh yeah, that's the Black Lady. And I was like, what are you talking about? What's the Black Lady? And she told me the story that she had died there tragically, and she messes with people on the reservation from time to time. And I talked to some other elders of the tribe, and they're like, yeah, it's a thing. She's still here, and she does. She picks certain people to mess with. I'm like, oh, okay, great. But that reservation, this is a story I haven't told you. So my wife's brother, my former brother-in-law, got very, very, very sick with cancer. And we always felt a really dark, just nasty presence around him all the time, whether it was a spirit or something. And my ex-wife used to say, there's something that's latched onto him and it won't let go of him. And I was like, yeah, I kind of, put it off. I didn't really know what to think. But when you'd walk between her house, which is right here, and his house that was over here, less than, a stone's throw away, in between those two houses, it just felt like a super heavy, just negative, dread feeling, sad and depressing, and it's just really bad. After her brother had passed away, we were both in bed sleeping. We slept with our side window open that faced his house. And I remember hearing her in her sleep trying to wake me up. And I woke up and I was like, what's going on? And as I'm coming to, there was a black figure over the top of her, and it went out the side window and left the room. And she told me she couldn't breathe, and she was really anxious and kind of freaking out. And she told me I felt like someone was holding her down. So we cleansed the house with sage and, other herbs and other things to try to get that bad energy to go away. And ever since then, that spirit or energy hasn't been there. So, whether it was a shadow figure or a bad spirit or what have you, whatever it was, I saw it leave, and it was tormenting her after her brother had passed away. So
that's amazing. So one thing I want to discuss is a lot of people think that when you're talking about Native American spirits or spirituality, that somehow it's separate from non-Native people. Mm-hmm. But what we believe and what we promote is that everything is connected and overlaps. Now, on this continent and in this region, the fact that Native people were here first, they have an older language, an older culture. It's natural to understand that their spirits and their presence are going to be stronger because of the longer history. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't take away from the fact that any human being from anywhere that lives on planet Earth, we're made of the same things. And when someone passes away, whether they be European, whether they're from Africa or China, or whether they're from London, England, We're all made of the same materials, and that's one thing that people don't understand. And so we like to promote the fact that all of these stories intertwine. So even if it happened to Native American people on a reservation, hundreds of years ago, it can affect us today, and it doesn't matter if we're Native or not. And just like your crew was down in that chamber behind the falls, and you experienced unusual things. Well, that was recently. That was you, and you're not Snoqualmie, but you are a human being that experienced this paranormal phenomenon that goes back to the first people. So the understanding is that we're all connected, and that what we do matters. What we do and how we interact matters, whether we're Native or not. To have respect for those spirits, those ancestors, and to speak in a respectful way, and to acknowledge some of the suffering and have compassion for anyone who suffered or died or was murdered or had a tragic life. And that's really important. It's that kind of unity in paranormal understanding. It's a lot of people want to separate, but we're always talking about how everything is connected. And your stories are a perfect example of how all of those worlds are connected. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for this little interview today. And we're going to go ahead and post this online, because I know a lot of people are just really fascinated with your stories. I mean, they're like, who is this guy? Well, I've told the stories, and I've never, sometimes I say your name, sometimes I don't. But everyone's like, who is this guy? I want to meet this guy. And like, so now they're going to see your face, they're going to hear your firsthand accounts, and it's going to be pretty cool. You'll probably get some invites to different interviews.
I like it.
If you want to be interviewed, we know a lot of people in the paranormal community, pretty much all over the world, because we're working with folks in, UK, England, and parts of Europe and whatnot. So yeah, be ready for a little bit of notoriety. So all right, my friend.
Cool. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me tell my stories.
I think we're gonna make some elk sausage and potatoes now, right?
Yeah.
Oh God, that sounds so good.
I haven't had elk since I lived here last. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.